Welcome. Good evening.
Good evening.
How's everyone doing tonight? You look fantastic. I can't see any of you. My name is Mike Micklon. I am the Executive Artistic Director here at Johnson Hall. Just by a show of hands, how many people is your first time up in our beautiful new space? Awesome, welcome. Thrilled to have you here. We've gone through a recent renovation, and we reopened in March of 2024. And we've just been having a great time up here. So please feel free to come back and see a performance sometime. And tonight we're very excited to have this panel. It's part of the work that we're trying to do culturally in our community to enrich folks if we can, and invite people in to hear great talks like this. So we're going to hopefully have many more like this. I'm going to get off the stage and turn it over to Professor Ranco, and he's going to run you through the night. So thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Darren Ranco, and I'm a professor of anthropology and chair of Native American programs at the University of Maine and a Penobscot Nation citizen. It's so great to see you all out for the panel called From Treaties to Today, Wabanaki Tribal Sovereignty in Maine. Many of you are familiar with our speakers tonight, but I do want to introduce them in turn of the way that they'll be speaking, just because it's such a packed, set of experts that we have today. And so I'll start with Donna, and then go to Zeke, and then Maulian. So, and that'll be the order in which they'll be speaking, and then we'll take questions from the audience after they're done, and after I, make some jokes about things they're saying. Okay. Donna Loring is a Penobscot Tribal Elder, former Penobscot Tribal Council member, author, and playwright, former senior advisor on tribal affairs to Governor Mills, a Vietnam Army veteran. Donna was the first woman to serve as a police chief in the state of Maine when she served as police chief of the Penobscot Nation. She also served as the chair of the Women Veterans Commission under Governor Angus King. For many years, she has hosted Wabanaki Windows on WERU radio, where she discusses current issues within Wabanaki communities. Donna and the show were recently awarded the 2025 Hometown Media Award for Racial Justice and Civil Rights Programming by the Foundation of the Alliance for Community Media. That's really easy to say, although I will say Donna did thank me because I'm a frequent guest there. As the Penobscot Nation representative to the Maine State Legislature, Donna authored or co-authored a number of very important bills, including the 2001 law, an act to require teaching Maine Native American history and culture in Maine schools. Next, we have I was complaining about getting old, and she said that I didn't have a right to do that. So, Osihkiyol Crofton-Macdonald is a Wolastoqey person from the Houlton Band of Maliseet, as well as the Oramoktu First Nation in New Brunswick. Zeke has spent his life advocating for Native rights in the United States and Canada. He's currently serving as the tribal ambassador for the Houlton Band of Maliseet. He serves as board president for the Wabanaki Alliance and is a tribal co-commissioner for the Houlton Band of Maliseet on the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission. Zeke graduated from the University of Maine in 2015, where he received degrees in history and political science, and is attending graduate school at the University of New Brunswick, where he studies history. He is working. Are you still working on your master's thesis? Is this still good? This is just me catching up with him. I apologize. Master's thesis on Wabanaki treaty history. Before assuming his duties as ambassador, Zeke worked for the Wabanaki First Nation in resource development and consultation with the Wolastoqey Nation, New Brunswick, as a co-researcher documenting treaty hunting and harvesting rights in the province. As a research associate at the Atlantic Canada Studies Center at the University of New Brunswick, and worked for the Houlton Band of Maliseet with the Indian Child Welfare Act. Welcome, Zeke. Maulian Bryant is executive director of the Wabanaki Alliance. He has been with the Alliance since its founding in 2020, serving for 4 years as president of the Wabanaki Alliance board. She served as the first Penobscot Nation Tribal Ambassador from 2017 to 2024, having been appointed by Penobscot Nation Chief Kirk Francis. Prior to her work as ambassador, Maulian served as an elected member of the Penobscot Nation Tribal Council. She grew up on Indian Island within the Penobscot Nation's reservation and is the daughter of former Penobscot Nation Chief Barry Dana, who served as chief from 2000 to 2004. I first got to know her as a powerful Indigenous advocate in the Not Your Mascot movement, where she proved to be a pivotal voice in the effort to end Indian mascots in the state of Maine, where she started to engage in that work, I think, as a teenager, right? So that was when I got to know her. She graduated from the University of Maine in Orono with a degree in political science. In 2022, Colby College presented her with an honorary doctorate for her work on equity issues and policy. So again, we'll go in this order, speaking, and obviously we could go for days and days on a topic like Wabanaki tribal sovereignty in the state of Maine, but we really did want to give you first with Donna a kind of key grounding of the sort of issues. Zeke will go into the frameworks and legacies from treaties and how that's still relevant to today, and then Maulian will go over sort of the more recent history and sort of where we're at and where we seem to be going. So, Donna, if you could set the stage as to how the state of Maine and the Wabanaki Nations are engaged in this issue around tribal sovereignty, I'd appreciate it.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. Good to see you, Troy. Any other candidates I should recognize there? What?
No.
You had your hand up.
Oh, Jordan Wood.
Jordan Wood, okay. Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Thought it was only fair. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of notes here that I always carry with me, and depending on what I think the audience wants to hear and how I feel, whether I feel comfortable talking to them, sometimes I'll just read, but I'm not going to just read tonight. But I'm going to start by going back to 1820, actually 1829. This guy named John Dean, and he was commissioned by the then governor of the state of Maine to buy 2 townships from the Penobscot Nation. These 2 townships were, actually, we had reserved 4 townships in treaties. And I'll get to the 1833 thing in a minute. But 1829, they tried to buy 2 townships from the Penobscot. And even though John Dean had carte blanche, he could have offered as much money as was required to get these 2 townships. He decided that because the tribe wanted, I don't know, 60,000 or something like that for that property, those properties. He thought they were being greedy, and he decided he wasn't going to give them that money, and he left. I'm just cutting this because there was like 3 days of negotiations here and a lot of other stuff happening, but he left without making the deal, and he was a bit upset. When he came back to the state, he wrote the governor a letter, and in the letter he talks about a number of things that he recommends that the state government should do as far as the tribes were concerned. First of all, he recommended that the state of Maine go into a coercive system. Basically recommended that the tribal lands be broken up into family lots, and that the tribal members be compelled to be farmers. And of course, they're not farmers; they're hunters and gatherers. And he also recommended that the state manage all tribal affairs, and that the goal was to make the Indians useful members of the state. So the goal was to integrate tribal members into the state of Maine, into the majority culture, and make them regular citizens. And I'll use the term special rights because I've heard it for years and years. And I'm sure you have too. So he recommended this back in 1829 in a letter to the governor. So keep that in mind as I'm moving forward. So in 1833, the state sent negotiators again, but this time they negotiated for four townships, which was all that we had reserved in our treaties. And this time, they were successful in getting the property, getting the lands that they went to negotiate for. They did it through any means they could. One of them, the means was that they promised to build houses for a few tribal leaders and pay them a certain amount of money if they'd sign this deed. And some of them actually did sign, but not the majority of tribal members. And it was not done the way that the Penobscot Nation always did land business, and that was to have the whole tribal community decide. And they just got a few signatures. So with these signatures of agreement to buy this land for, I believe it was like $50,000 or something like that. Yeah, $50,000. They came back with the signatures, and when the tribal communities didn't find out about this for like a couple of weeks later, and they were really upset about this because these tribal lands were reserved in treaties since 1776, I believe it was. So, and the reason they were reserved was for hunting territory, and for medicines and resources. It was all they had, because their properties had been shrunk so much by the colonists taking over their territories that all they had left were these four townships and the islands and the river. So when they found out that their townships had been sold, the tribe was really, they were beyond upset. So they wrote a letter detailing how they felt they had been, this had been fraudulently accomplished. And the way that we know what happened was because back then, they didn't have recordings in the legislature. They had newspaper reporters. And newspaper reporters would write things down. And I found these accounts in the Kennebec Journal of 1833 accounts as to what took place. And the tribe had brought their remonstrance, they call it a remonstrance, forward in writing to the legislature, detailing how they felt they were cheated out of their land, out of this land that they had valued and kept and put in treaties for, since 1776. And ultimately one of the representatives who was on the committee that read this letter and did the investigations and whatever, said that he thought the rest of the legislature should actually have a copy of details of their complaint, of their remonstrance. Mm-hmm. And So they put it up for a vote in the legislature, and the vote ended up being not to give the report, and it was by one vote, and that was by the Speaker of the House. He decided. So that was the end of that. The tribe lost all of their hunting territory and their resources. And then we move forward to, I'm just giving you key, because we could talk about this for for a long time. So let's fast forward to 1942, when war was declared. So state of Maine, along with other states, actually decided that they needed to sort of streamline their budget because of the war efforts. So they had a whole list of departments and things that they wanted to cut the funding for. And they created this committee called the Legislative Research Committee. And on one of the items that they wanted to look at was the Indians. So they had this Legislative Research Committee interview the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, which I think back then was Health and Welfare. And then they had the Attorney General, who was Frank Cowan. And then they had a guy named Ralph Proctor, who came at the end of all of this because they had commissioned him to go out and do a study and then come back and report. So during this time of interviews with these people, I happened to come across something which was there all this time, but you never really, sometimes something's in plain sight. Am I losing time here? Okay. Sometimes something's in plain sight, and you don't put two and two together unless you have the experience when you're looking at it to say, hey, this is really important. So what happened was, during this Legislative Research Committee hearing, they decided to keep a record of everything that was said in these committees, which we call 1942 transcripts. So this was during COVID. So I requested the archives to give me a copy of the Ralph Proctor report of 1942, which I knew existed, and I actually had a written copy in front of me. But I wanted a digital one because I thought it'd be easier. So I sent an email to the archives requesting that, and they said, well, what section do you want? I said, well, I want the whole thing. And they said, well, no, we can't, just tell me what you want for a section. And I said, I want the whole thing. So anyway, they said, well, we can't give you the whole thing, blah, blah, blah. So I contacted a clerk that I had worked with over the years in legislature, because I didn't even know he was still working there. But I contacted him. I said, I'm having a hard time getting this. Can you get this for me? And he said, well, try. So the next day, I get an email from the archives with the entire digital copy. But there was something very interesting. They said, there are papers surrounding this copy. Do you want them? I said, absolutely. So what those papers were the transcripts of the interviews that was held verbatim from the elected officials committee were listening and interviewing these state representatives that were at the table there, the commissioner and the attorney general and the researcher. And growing up, I'm pretty old. I'm gonna be like 77. In all of that time, in all of my years growing up on Indian Island, we were never able to move forward economically. We're always fighting, always begging for something, always asking for food vouchers, for fuel vouchers, for school clothes, everything we got. You know, it made us feel like we were begging for everything. And I always wondered, you know, and the other thing too is, if you look at the tribal communities, even today, the infrastructure in those communities is not the same as the next town. Even water today, Pleasant Point still doesn't have water, and then that passed the legislature like 2 years ago. Anyway, I digress. So when I read these transcripts, everything, you know, and we always wondered why we couldn't get ahead. These transcripts are like the Nixon papers, and they answered all of those questions. And it also proved that the state of Maine kept tribal communities in poverty on purpose. Also, that this quarter blood thing, that you have to be a tribal, in order to be a tribal member, you need to be quarter blood. Well, that came from this committee too, because what they wanted to do was to keep tribal membership very small. And eventually, what they wanted to do was have the tribes disappear, because blood quantum, if you kept on that blood quantum, you would have no tribe. And they figured by 2025, that was the figure they said. And that was in the transcripts. So they also tried to figure out, well, what if we put them into the next town? What if we split them all up, put them into the next town? Would that work? And they said, oh, no, the towns wouldn't like that. They wouldn't have to take care of those Indians. They don't want them in their towns. So this kind of went back and forth to try to figure out, how are they going to dissolve the tribal communities and make the tribal people disappear? And you know what? That's genocide. It's genocide. So I made these transcripts are so important that I had them read verbatim on my radio shows. So if you want to look up those transcripts and hear them, go to Wabanaki Windows, and you can hear the transcripts being read. So the next, I don't know how much time I have. 4 minutes? Okay, so so let's just jump to the Maine Indian Land Claim Settlement Act. Let's just jump to that. So that Settlement Act was the culmination of everything the state ever dreamed of. First of all, it was a land claims, it started out being Land Claims Settlement Act. What is it now? It's the Maine Claims Act. Land was taken out of it because what happened was the state wouldn't negotiate unless the tribes agreed to discuss jurisdiction. And that's a whole other thing. But it wasn't just land. They wanted total jurisdiction and control over the tribes. They didn't want the tribes competing with them in any way, and they didn't want to see the tribes moving ahead and become self-sufficient as far as economically goes. Because and look at what happened with the casinos. Oh my goodness, wouldn't have those tribes. Look at all the money they could have made with those casinos. Holy tamale! Can't have that. So let's remember what I said about Dean, the things that Dean wanted to do. So what happened with the I just want to just read this land claims thing. This what the state got from the land claims, because we all heard about what the tribes got. This is what the state got. They got a settlement of over 2/3 of state lands, and they didn't pay 1 penny. They kept majority of the jurisdiction, and they excluded the tribes from all future federal laws. And the state is held harmless for any past injustices, and the tribes cannot sue for past abuses of stolen resources, and the state never has to say they're sorry. The end.
Thank you, Donna. Well, we're holding questions to the end, so think about questions you might have for what she just talked about. I want to hand it over to Zeke, and could you give us some of the context to these our Wabanaki engagements around sovereignty through our treaties and the treaty expressions and how those are still relevant till today? Yeah.
Absolutely. Can you ever hear me okay? Oh, Quay, Nil Lewis, Osihkiyol Crofton-Macdonald, Ulustakwe, Nil, Nujaya, Manaxnegiak, Naga, Wolamogduk. Hello everyone, my name is Osihkiyol Crofton-Macdonald. I am a Ulustakwe person from the Houlton Band and Maliseet Indians and Wabanaki First Nation in New Brunswick, Canada, also known as Wolamogduk. I currently serve as the tribal ambassador for the Houlton Band and Maliseets and on the board of directors for the Wabanaki Alliance, as well as tribal commissioner for the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission. I represent HBMI there, and I've been doing that for, I guess it's going on 6 years now. Well, thank you, Darren, and thank you, Donna, for that overview, for getting us started there. It's when we all sat down and planned this out, we all had ideas of what we wanted to speak about, and what I wanted to address is treaties. It's what I know. It's what I've been surrounded by for a very long time now. When I was a kid, I mean that's where it began. When I was young, surrounded by elders who set me on this path, and I eventually decided to pursue it in school. I went to the University of Maine, where I studied history and for my undergrad, and then graduate school at the University of New Brunswick, where I continued to study history. And my master's thesis is specifically on the one treaty in particular, the Watertown Treaty of 1776. So if anyone wants to talk about that, I can bore your ears off for sure. But I want to talk about treaties today, and I might take it in a slightly unusual direction. I know when people think about treaties, they think about these moments of international diplomacy. They tend to think of a series of dates and timelines. And one thing that I wanted to help impart, it was something that was shared with me when I was a kid. I was sitting listening to elders down in Houlton Band and Maliseet Indians, which is the only Wolastoqey community in Maine, by the way. There are 8 Wolastoqey settlements. And I keep using that word Wolastoqey for those of you who might not be familiar with that. That's, I say Maliseet, but in our language. Wolastoqey is reference to the Wolastuk River, or the St. John River. It's the people of the beautiful river. And the Wolastuk River is a reference to the St. John River. But there are 6 Wolastoqey communities in New Brunswick, 1 in Quebec, and 1 in Maine, which is Houlton Band and Maliseet Indians. And down in Maine, we speak of, well, there's, from my knowledge, 3 treaties with the United States, but in particular, the first one is the Watertown Treaty of 1776. But up in New Brunswick, they speak of different treaties. They speak of the peace and friendship treaties beginning in 1725 to 1778. The first of which was the Masquerade Treaty of 1725. I know I wasn't gonna list off a bunch of dates, and I won't. But one thing that I had the, I guess, privilege to experience when I was living in New Brunswick was an opportunity to listen from a whole bunch of different knowledge keepers. And I was working for the Osihkiyol Nation, New Brunswick. I was a researcher, a community surveyor, and I just spoke with a whole bunch of people about their traditional land use and how they're practicing these treaty rights today. And I would hear the same thing, and no matter where I went, same thing I heard growing up, and that is unceded Wolastoqey territory. Whether that's happening in New Brunswick, which is a current, quite large title claim case happening in New Brunswick right now, or Aroostook County, Maine. It was always the same thing. It was unceded Wolastoqey territory, which means never surrendered, never legally purchased or sold, just taken. And it's one of those just very unfortunate things that you will hear about in each community, is just the unfortunate reality of this taking. And you go to school and they don't speak on that at all. I barely ever heard it. It's starting to get a little bit better, but that difference was something that I always really struggled with, to understand that that divide in the historical narrative. I had the privilege of growing up with some really powerful elders. To name a few, Imelda and Dave Purley were big. When I was growing up, I had the honor of living with them for a little bit. Imelda, she's a medicine woman and a spiritual leader, and Dave, he's a historian. He's focused on treaty and a politician. He was chief in Tobig for a number of years and served on council for a long time. But Dave was a big inspiration for why I wanted to study what I studied, and continue to study what I studied. But another elder that really influenced me was Andrew Bear Nicholas. So the way treaties were discussed in New Brunswick for a very long time, and I know I'm talking about New Brunswick here, but it's unfortunately the exact same history here in Maine, but all of this predates the existence of Maine. So basically how they spoke about these treaties was as full total surrenders. It was a surrender to the British king, and that was how this history was taught. Treaties were spoken of for a very long time. That changed in the 90s. It was through the work of Andrew Bear Nicholas. She did some archival work and discovered a second half of that famous treatise, the Massachusetts Treaty of 1725, which again frustrates me because that was always there. It was just something people didn't talk about. But that second half of the treaty revealed the British obligations. It wasn't just native Wabanaki obligations to Great Britain, but it was also a mutual exchange. It was a nation-to-nation agreement, mutual recognition of sovereignty. And that second half talked about how the British would not encroach on Wabanaki hunting, planting, fishing territories. And I say Wabanaki intentionally. This was the Wabanaki Confederacy. It was the Wolastoqey, Maliseet, the Mi'kmaq, Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Wabanaki were all part of this treaty back then. And these sets of terms were continually renewed throughout the 18th century, multiple times, and all under the basis of that original agreement, which was, of course, continually broken. But one of those, and once that second half of the treaty came out, suddenly people started talking about treaties in a completely different light. Suddenly, the Osihkiyol and Mi'kmaq nations up in New Brunswick can assert treaty rights under the Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, and they can hunt and fish within these territories. And one thing that I find very frustrating is all of this didn't even happen until the 90s. So all of this, which is new information, new ways of conceptualizing treaties, happened after the Maine Indian Land Claims Settlement Act. And in a lot of ways, here in Maine, became stuck in 1980, and we never really grew. Where the rest of the world, and Canada's a great example, is growing and developing on, Indigenous relations, in considering this from an international diplomatic standpoint, but the state of Maine has stayed still. And it's something that I find very frustrating, for sure. But, okay, another thing that I found very frustrating, my time in school and growing up was a series of frustrations, I suppose. But another thing was the wording of the treaties themselves. So the Watertown Treaty of 1776 was a treaty of peace and alliance, peace, friendship, and alliance. It didn't outline territorial claim or territorial boundary. And when I was a kid, I wish it did. It always seemed like that would make things so much easier. And for Passamaquoddy and Penobscot, they do have those claims, and Donna was talking about it. We see, even when you have that firm proof of these boundaries and claim, we have claim to this river, it will still be a fight. Even if it's cut and dry and black and white on paper, it is still a fight. But we don't have that. And the Watertown Treaty, for instance, is just a treaty of peace and friendship. And one of the things that I noticed, and it's not just what I struggled with, I think I see a lot of treaty historians and lawyers who attempt to litigate these issues. One of the things that I think we all fall into is a trap of attempting to see something that you expect to see instead of dealing with what is actually there. I wanted to see these boundaries of claim. I wanted to see us assert our rights in the ways that we can litigate today, in ways that we can legislate today. But it's not there. But what's actually there, if you actually were to look at these treaties, peace and friendship treaties, is indigenous methodologies. It's worldview. Because within my Wolastoqey teachings, land is not something that you can be owned. What it is a responsibility to form a relationship with territory, to steward territory, a relationship with not just people, but with all the animate and inanimate aspects of that territory. And when you form a treaty, it's forming a relationship. And that just changes everything. And as I started to grow and develop and how I viewed treaties, I actually today think that the choice to stay true to our own conceptualizations and our own methodologies is far more of an impactful demonstration of our sovereignty than if we had explained our claims in terms that the colonial system could understand. It might be easier today to attempt to legislate or litigate these issues today, but if you want to look for sovereignty, it's staring us right in the face. And it's right there. And it's our choice to stay true to our beliefs and our worldview. And so, the question of how do we, incorporate these ideas today, and how we create laws today that incorporate these ideas is massively complex. Of course, we've been dealing with this for a very long time. But one thing that I do want to stress is the importance of honoring that worldview and continuing to learn about it and to teach it. Because that worldview, the idea that we are have a responsibility to form a relationship with not just people, but the land itself, I truly believe that is the way forward for all of us, not just Indigenous people, but for everyone, to be able to live and find happiness in this world for the next 7 generations.
So Maulian, we'll hand it over to you. Have no one's gone over, including Donna, so we have plenty of time for you. The idea that how do we bring all this together to today, and where does this legacy stand, and how are we engaging with our sovereignty in the current times?
Thank you, Darren. Oh, can you all hear me?
No.
Hello? All right. Thank you. That better? Yes. Awesome. So it's time to fix this stuff, right? Yes. Past time. This has been incredible. My kids would say you both just ate. That's a good thing. That's what the kids are saying. Such an honor to be up here with you all and to be sharing this space with you all. And I have some notes here, but so much of what Donna and Ambassador said has sparked so much for me. And I want to take it back a little bit further in history to think about some of the more brutal parts of all this. And I'm going to get kind of dark, and then I'm going to bring it to a better place. So I think as we all have a little bit. So back in the 1700s, we had colonial governments under the orders of the Crown sending colonists to hunt Wabanaki people right where we're sitting. There were proclamations saying, go find Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Abenaki, and back then there were like 26 different distinct tribes. Go find these people, hunt them down, kill them, and turn in their scalps as proof of them being killed, and we'll give you lots and lots of money. There were set prices for men, women, and children, and we did some math, and back then you could get 50 pounds for the scalp of a Penobscot man, and now that's like $11,000. So this economy of killing us goes back such a long way, and those are the roots of the dehumanization. Those are the roots of some of this genocide. So when you come into a place and you're able to demolish people that way, it gets to be really easy to build on that. So the things that Donna taught us all about, that's building on this darkness and this trauma that we're all still trying to heal from, and our communities are trying to heal from. So then when you come in and you disrespect the land and you disrupt that connection that Ambassador talked about so beautifully, and you don't follow through on the treaties that you made with these sovereign nations, these land claim settlements from 1980, that you're talking about 2/3 of the state of Maine illegally taken from the tribes, and the state has never really had to account for that. The state didn't spend any money in that settlement, and they were able to put in place some really oppressive policy. I think it'll go down in history as one of the most masterful negotiations that I can think of. I wanted to hit a little bit on these treaties, and I'll get to a bright place right now and then take it back to darkness, I guess. But we were able to restore in the printed copies of the Maine Constitution that treaty language from when Maine became a state. Treaties that they didn't make good on, but also language that they tried to hide. And I was so heartened that a statewide referendum a couple of years ago, Maine voted like 70% to see that language in our printed constitution. So that started with a bill from Senator Rachel Tubbett Ross, and it ended with a real show of strength of Maine voters and a real hunger for this knowledge and transparency. So thinking about this darkness of history and jumping forward to the 2020s, where we took a small step together to recover some of this, and that's heartening to me. So something else that Donna said that really struck me was this feeling of assimilation and forcing tribal people into different society and out of our cultural connections and kinship with one another and the land. It's all about that disruption. I think as time goes on, people are more and more familiar with the boarding school era in the United States and Canada, where that was the mentality of the government and a lot of churches. They would come in and essentially nationwide, the government had tried to break up tribal communities, make everyone be farmers, give plots of land, and that didn't work. Tribes stuck together, and they kept hunting, and they kept preserving medicine, and they kept, keeping those migratory routes to different places in the seasons. So the United States government took our children, and they took them to be re-taught, and that in and of itself is cruel, to separate children from communities. And then you add on the abuse and the killings. These schools had graveyards attached to the schools. And we all grew up with this knowledge and knew that this happened into the 60s and 70s. But I think a lot of people don't really understand that it's that recent. So thinking about this decision in 1980, the writing was on the wall that this would have bad consequences for sovereignty. And a lot of times we hear, well, why would you take such a bad deal? Obviously, this was going to block your access to federal Indian law. Obviously, this was going to impose state jurisdiction where it shouldn't be. But taking into account the story that's been told here today, and tribal leaders in 1980 were basically told, look, Jimmy Carter wants to help you out. Ronald Reagan is knocking on the door, and he doesn't at all. So take this or maybe get nothing. So that's been the theme throughout all of our history, is this rock and a hard place. And unfortunately, it continues into some of our more recent history. In the 129th legislature, I was freshly ambassador. I was sort of wet behind the ears, and I got pulled into a meeting with Troy Jackson, who was the Senate president, former Speaker Sarah Gideon, and essentially the legislature had a lot of, or legislative members, I should say, had a lot of ideas about how to wrestle with tribal sovereignty and how to make this all better and improve upon this. Not everyone, but a lot of our friends in there in both chambers did. So there were bills sort of coming in left and right. Appeal that whole land claims and do something new, or amend this part or this part of it. And to the credit of legislative leadership, there was a real effort to do what the tribes wanted to do. So you had tribal chiefs, vice chiefs, representatives, ambassadors, all sort of saying, we've been down this road before. We've studied the Settlement Act. We've told you all how to change it. It falls on deaf ears, it ends up in a veto, and we spent all this time, energy, and resources, and we go home empty-handed and frustrated, and the oppression continues. So I think we tried something a little bit new, and it was probably one of the most successful collaborative processes I've seen in state government, and it was a task force with tribal leaders and state leaders, and it was really looking at the heart of the problem, the Settlement Act. But I think it grew into so much more. It started some really good relationships. It started a lot of really good discussions. Of course, we have passed the law to ban Indian mascots in Maine. We have passed the law to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day by this point. And I think those, I get prickly, because sometimes people say, well, those are just symbolic. They don't matter. They matter. They matter. When you are working with people who don't view you as human, when you're working with people who want to celebrate your genocide, it matters to change that narrative. It matters a lot. So leading into sort of the meat and potatoes of the sovereignty stuff in legislation, this task force with tribal leaders and state leaders produced this slate of recommendations, and we've been working on those ever since in different forms. And the Wabanaki Alliance formed in 2020. I think the tribes really saw an opportunity to come together around a lot of these things. We don't all have the same priorities or goals or communities. We have very different ideas sometimes, but this approach to the Settlement Act really seemed to resonate with the tribal leaders at that time who wanted to make some changes. So the task force work was essentially 22 amendments to the 1980 Maine Indian Land Claims Settlement Act and the Maine Implementing Act. So there's a federal version, there's a state version. In the original act, the tribes got funds from the federal government to buy land back, but only in very specific pieces of the state, and only a certain amount of acreage. And that varied by tribes, and the Maliseet have a very low number of acreage, and the Mi'kmaq are not in that act at all, but they've had to deal with a lot of the same consequences. And there's a lot of tribal history around how everybody shakes out in the settlement. You can learn more on WabanakiAlliance.com. We go through a lot of that. And Donna went through very clearly what the state got out of the Settlement Act. So as we move these pieces of legislation, we're talking about things like fish and game jurisdiction, criminal and civil jurisdiction in our tribal courts, taxation, gaming, federal Indian law. That's a really important piece to think about. That settlement from 1980 was able to block the tribes in Maine from accessing any piece of federal legislation meant to benefit tribes. And the way it works is even sicker. We can essentially assume we can have access to a law, and the state of Maine can step in at any time and say, no, you don't. An example of this is the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization in 2015. So the Federal Violence Against Women Act at that time added in language specifically for tribal communities. And this is important because there is an epidemic of violence against Indigenous women, and part of it is jurisdictional problems along with stereotypes and invisibility and a lot of other things. So VAWA sought to correct that problem, and the tribes started to embrace this, and then the Attorney General, who is our former governor, Janet Mills, stepped in on behalf of the state and said, we don't want the tribes exercising Violence Against Women Act jurisdiction in tribal courts. We're too concerned about the rights of perpetrators that happen to be Mainers. Under VAWA, if the domestic violence victim is a tribal member and the abuser is not, we can take that in tribal court, but if we don't have access to that, we have to kick those cases out to other courts and see very little justice. So we worked with Governor Mills throughout this task force process. One of those recommendations was to restore VAWA jurisdiction, and we got there. We got a state statute on the books. We got mentioned in the federal version, which is a whole other process. That took 7 years, start to finish. And a lot of the times we hear the excuse when we propose these changes that we want access to federal Indian law. Oh, it's too much at once. It's too big, too broad. It's going to make a lot of confusion. Why don't you work with us on one law at a time? One law took 7 years. And that's work, that's money, that's resources, that's time. When our standpoint is we are sovereign people. We should have our rights as federally recognized tribal nations. We should have access to federal Indian law. And that's been a key piece of legislation we've moved independently of the rest of the task force recommendations. So I'll run down the greatest hits of what we've been able to do and what we haven't been able to do. We've had this big, large omnibus legislation. That's a lot of these recommendations. We had it in its original form, LD 2094, we got a vote out of judiciary, and then the pandemic sort of stopped that whole session and we didn't go back in, so the bill died. We came back in with LD 1626. That bill got a lot of buzz, a lot of attention. That was another omnibus effort. The governor expressed a lot of discomfort with that bill, and at the same time was negotiating a compromise bill, LD 585, and we got that one passed. So 1626 failed to reach the governor, and she basically said she would veto it, but we did pass 585, which restored a collaboration policy with state government. Paul LePage had rescinded a consultation policy when he was governor, so that restored that in a slightly different form. It also extended some taxation provisions to tribal governments, and it had a gaming component to it. So we had run a gaming bill the session before, and gaming is always its own thing. We don't lump it into things. People feel different ways about it. It's not really party lines. It's all over the place when you talk about tribes and gaming. So we ran a bill with Ben Collings, our former representative from Portland, and the bill was basically the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act should apply in Maine. And what IGRA does, all these acronyms and things, what IGRA does is a lot of people think, oh, it's just a carte blanche, like, here you go, tribes, go build casinos on every corner. Go buy Portland and turn it into your resort. It's not like that. What IGRA does is it gives tribes the authority to negotiate compacts with the state government around gaming. It's a restrictive act, actually. So that law, that bill, passed in both chambers, and we almost overrode the governor's veto. The governor did veto that, and I think we were like 4 votes short in the House, which is a lot of progress. If you want to see a great floor speech, go look at Rena Newell from that veto override day. It was incredible. Passamaquoddy, former tribal rep-in-chief and current member of our board. So the governor vetoed the bill, but also said, I will work with you on something about gaming. So that led us to the 585 piece. We get access to revenue from online sports betting, newly legalized industry. And we also have the chair of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee, Senator Craig Hickman, here. So we had some heavy hitters in the front row. So we were able to get that piece done. And then we moved some legislation about federal Indian law later on. The governor vetoed that. We also had a federal component under Representative Jared Golden the Advancing Equality for Wabanaki Nations Act. And Representative Golden, he kept coming to us. He was very interested in working on something with us while the Democrats had the House federally. So we got working on that with him. And just a little inside baseball, I guess not that inside because we're being recorded, but we had heard that we would most likely need a senator, U.S. senator, on our side. And we had heard that Senator King might not oppose it if we made it prospective only. So we went in with a nice bill to restore all of this federal Indian law, and we pared it back to try to get the favor of Senator King. And he killed it behind the scenes anyway, after the House vote. And when our coalition, he never said anything public about it, but when our coalition of supporters reached out to him, his language was very similar to the veto letter from the governor. This is too much, it's confusing, no one will know what laws apply and which land they're on throughout the state, it'll be a patchwork. And that's funny to us, because we know just how little tribal land there is in Maine. You won't get confused, I promise. So fast forward to now that there's also, Donna mentioned the Sabayak water crisis. We did pass some legislation. When I say we, it's the tribal governments. The Wabanaki Alliance advocates for it. So we feels like, we did something together. But that legislation, that also has to do with amending that Settlement Act because Sabayak needs to dig a new well and put in some filtration systems. And there's all these levels to getting clean drinking water. And the way the tribes operate in the state right now, if we want to put land into trust, there is a process for local towns and cities to veto that. They can basically say, no, we're next to you and we don't want you to put that land into trust. That's not like that anywhere else in the country. So that's part of the issue over there. We fixed that legislatively. They still need a whole lot of support and resources to get clean drinking water. I'll end on a high note and then say where we're going forward. So we passed a pretty great bill, LD 2007, and this was to restore criminal jurisdiction, lots of criminal jurisdiction on tribal courts. And we did a report with researchers at Harvard that basically paints a great picture of the state of the economies of the Wabanaki nations in Maine. And the report had some great findings. It really validated a lot of the things we felt, that the Settlement Act does hold not just the tribes back, but the communities and towns and cities around the tribal communities. We could be doing so much more for everyone in Maine if we got past some of these hurdles. And a cool finding in that was that the biggest indicator of a successful tribal nation is a healthy and functioning tribal court. So there's something about being able to have that sort of stewardship of your own laws and people and lands that really is empowering for tribal nations. So restoring criminal jurisdiction on tribal court was a really great thing for us. This session, we have two bills with Senator Talbot Ross. One is a piece of omnibus legislation. One is looking at federal Indian law. We'll be going through the process with those starting in January. Our key piece of legislation last year was actually sponsored by Minority Leader Billy Bob Fockingham in the House. And this was a bill to prohibit the use of eminent domain on tribal lands. So we actually in committee with the blessing of tribal leaders scaled this back to current trust lands only because it was articulated that might get more Republican folks to come along with us and maybe override a veto. It didn't work. Again, rock hard place. We watered down the bill. People don't follow through. So this bill got to the governor. She vetoes it. And the reasoning is, well, maybe in the future we might need tribal lands for like clean energy, something like that. We don't want to bind this or future legislatures to something this legislature does, things like that. It's always the scare tactic of like, if we amend these things, no one's ever going to undo it. And we're like, yeah, we know how you feel. So we're coming off the veto of that very small and focused bill. We have a daunting year ahead with moving these larger pieces of legislation. But it's daunting, but I think it's also a real opportunity to get a lot of Mainers engaged around this stuff and really educate about how this isn't just this moment, this is all of this history. This is everything Donna talked about. This is our ancestors being hunted in these woods where we are right now. This is the scholarly research, ambassadors talking about these treaties of peace and friendship and laying out parameters for how this all should work, and that all being wiped away by further colonization and taking advantage of, a paternalistic position. So I think where we go from now is I'm so thankful for the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition and all these amazing supporters and people that just show up and volunteer and want to learn and want to help. It's really incredible. When we started, we had a few environmental people, faith-based people. They're like, we want to work with you. We want to help as much as we can. We have over 300 different businesses and organizations now that have signed on as supporters. And of those people, we have 50 to 100 that come hang out with us every couple of weeks on these calls or every month. And we talk about what our different teams are doing and where we're tabling throughout the state and what the strategy for the session looks like and what the board of directors is telling us to do. So it's really a grassroots movement like I've never seen, and it's something that is so necessary and so needed. And I think in these political and social times, grabbing a hold to really good work that we can do together and make progress on, even if it feels like fits and starts, that's healing, I think, for a lot of us. So I'm really excited to keep doing that with you all, and I'm so happy you're here tonight to learn from these amazing people, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maulian. I just wanted to see if there are any other sort of parting thoughts on the panel. Donna, Zeke, Maulian just went, but I have a feeling Donna wants to say something.
Yes, I do have some parting thoughts. First of all, I want to address the legislation that's passed, that's law now, about Pleasant Point having water. Communities on both sides have water. Pleasant Point doesn't. They still don't. So I don't know what you do, because there's a law saying that they need to get the water, and that's a right. That's a human right. Okay. That being said, I got a letter from my on my radio show, and the last show we addressed this letter, and it was from the. I'm going to pronounce this wrong. I know I am. It was from the Wolastoqey, close, mothers, grandmothers, and aunties. It's a statement, and I think it's important. They wanted us to share this statement. So I'm going to do that right now. I did it on the radio show. Now I'm going to do it again. This is the statement. As Wolastoqey mothers, grandmothers, and aunties, keepers of life, memory, and spirit, we speak today not out of anger, but out of deep sorrow and responsibility. Our teachings remind us that every child is sacred, that land is not possession, but a living relative, and that dignity belongs to all peoples, no matter how far from our own homeland they may be. We have long followed a path of non-interference, respecting the sovereignty and self-determination of other nations. This is a principle that has allowed us to survive, to heal, and to remain rooted in our own identity. Yet, there are moments in history when silence becomes too heavy to bear. As women whose families and ancestors has known the weight of disposition, forced removals, and systemic erasure, our hearts cannot turn away from the suffering in Gaza. We see the cries of Palestinian mothers, the echoes of our own. We see in the rubble of homes the memory of our sacred places lost. We see the denial of basic humanity, the long shadow of genocide. To witness such loss and remain silent would be a betrayal of our own stories. We do not speak to assign blame or to deepen wounds. We speak as women who understand that healing begins with recognition of pain, of injustice, and of shared humanity. We believe that all people have a right to live in safety, dignity, and peace on their ancestral lands. This includes our Palestinian relatives, whose suffering now demands the attention and compassion of the world. We urge those in power, those with voice and influence, to remember the human cost of war, to uphold the sanctity of life, and to choose justice over silence. From the banks of the Maliseet to the shores of Gaza, may our collective grief become a call for peace. Not peace built on erasure, but peace rooted in truth, dignity, and care for all life. Signed, Wolastoqey mothers, grandmothers, and aunties.
Thank you for sharing that, Donna. I don't know if anyone has anything. It's kind of a little bit hard to follow that, but Maulian, you had something.
I'll try. So one bill I didn't mention that's actually still technically in play is a Wabanaki Studies bill. So Donna, back in 2001, as our tribal representative, passed really historic legislation to require the teaching of Wabanaki studies in Maine schools. And it's had spotty implementation over the years, but there's some really cool work going on with a Penobscot educator, Bree Lowler, who's working for the Maine Department of Education. We're actually honoring her at our fundraiser, October 8th. You can come and see her get an award and join us. So that's still on the appropriations table and active. So some really important legislation there. And then I didn't recognize Tom Harnett in the audience, who was a excellent judiciary chair through so much of these bills, and just that's some really heavy work. These are some long hearings, and just want to acknowledge all his service to tribal people, and we appreciate it.
So we do have some time. Zeke, did you have anything else you wanted to share?
No, it's okay. I'll wait till the questions.
You wait till the questions? Okay. I don't think we have a microphone in the audience, but I'm happy to repeat or hand my microphone. I guess mine's the one that, although they're all mobile, but they're all. But if people had questions, I don't know, Monica, if you could help facilitate this, or someone, Sage. All right, that's good. Someone young and quite mobile. Anyone? So questions?
Yeah, first, just thank you so much for everything you shared. I learned a lot tonight. I wanted to share with you that one of the reasons I came to Maine to go to law school was because of the work of Murray Sinclair. And so I was so inspired by what he was able to accomplish in Canada with his Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because he actually got the attention of the world. And I believe that in the United States, the crimes that have occurred are at least equal, and yet we've never had a national truth and reconciliation process that everybody was aware of, that was open, and that held the United States to a higher standard, like the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. That it is pathetic that you are operating under law that is discriminatory, that was passed under duress, that was fraudulent, and just, as a newcomer to Maine, I find Maine to be a friendly, open place, but when I read that the federal right to vote was given to all Indigenous people, but Maine would not give it, I'm horrified because it is actually very notable in the state of tribes. So so I'm just wondering if you had thoughts about what Marie Sinclair was able to accomplish and whether something like that could happen in the United States or anything like that. So I hope that's an okay direction to go in, but that's what I've been thinking about. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great instinct. How do we account for all this and go forward together? And Maine did do a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that's some powerful stuff. Wabanaki Reach is a really great organization that took the lead in a lot of that work, and they left me a little present because my late grandmother, who just passed away about a month ago, Donna's older sister, she did an interview with them, and I didn't even know about it until very recently, and it was such a gift to read. So in that process, they talked with a lot of survivors of either boarding schools or their foster care system, and then after that, what do we do with all that? So one thing about that report that I find very powerful, of course I'm biased because I do this work, but the commissioners recommended supporting tribal sovereignty as a way to really move forward. And they recommended, there was a report at one time from Suffolk Law University, yeah, I guess that's what they're called, those researchers, and they basically had a lot of the same conclusions of, hey, this is how you amend this act and this is how you make this better. So I think the TRC pulled from some of those recommendations, and they're very similar, and that's one of their kind of, this is where these things intersect. It's not just policy, it's not just these other social issues, it's all related, and how you treat people as human beings, that matters, and some of that is through lawmaking and through legislation, and I think picking up on those threads is really important. Want to add?
Sure. Well, I'd also like to say thank you for that question, that insight, well, thank you for bringing up the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. That is something that maybe someone has a date when the legislature did. There's a public acknowledgement of how UNDRIP is a wonderful document, but it is, thanks in large part to the wording of the Settlement Act, which, the UNDRIP declares that there are certain laws that would apply here when it comes to things like consultation within treaty territories. But because of the Settlement Act, all of the treaty territories are supposedly settled, and therefore UNDRIP does not apply, which is, I think that is something that we absolutely should have here. It's an aspect of federal Indian policy that isn't practiced here. And consultation, for those who aren't aware, is the practice of, when there's a resource development happens within a recognized treaty territory, that proponent, the person who is developing that resource, has a duty to consult with whatever indigenous nation whose treaty territory they are in, and it opens up an opportunity that we can have an input on the environmental, the economic impact that it'll have on us, and that is not something that is practiced here in the state of Maine, but it should be.
Well, speaking of UNDRIP, 2008, UNDRIP was passed unanimously in the state of Maine in both legislatures. They recognized, there was a resolution recognizing UNDRIP, and that was before the United States recognized it. And I know that because I put the resolution through. And I did it because I was so upset with how that year had gone with tribal bills that I thought the least they can do is recognize the rights of indigenous people worldwide. And they did. But it was sort of like, well, okay, yeah, we'll do this. It doesn't mean anything, but, we'll do it. I think it does mean something. And, I think it means that the state of Maine, at that particular point in time, I don't know about now, but at that particular point in time, recognized that there were rights that this country should recognize for Indigenous people. So I think that should be, carried forward and not forgotten. Doesn't work for you, Troy.
I used to sit alongside Donna and she'd shut my mic off all the time. Well, I appreciate it very much. And I want to be careful how I phrase this. I mean, you guys give great discussion tonight, but I guess the way I look at this is, it feels to me like Maine is still very much a fuel state. People own large tracts of land. They still have great influence in Maine. I think a lot of what you talked about, federally, that influence is blocking what you want right now. When you talk about a little bit of land that you have and things like that, the people that are stopping what you want have been stopping it all along, and I'm angry at those same people, and I have no understanding of how long it's been for you. All of the injustices that you've had to go through, and your people and things like that, and that's I guess what makes me ask the question. More than anything, you said it, Ambassador. You see treaties and what you see them on paper. I see laws right now. I've seen laws over the last 20 years that have been passed that have not been followed. To me, it's a lot about who's in power and who is going to do what the Wabanaki wants, or what the Wabanaki deserves, and not so much changing the laws as they are. To me, the laws are already there, or the intent should already be there. It's about having people that actually care enough to push back against these large landowners, the feudal system that we already have, and have people that actually care to do the right thing. And I'm not even talking about myself. I'm just talking about people that actually care to do the right thing for the people in this state. And to me, that is the struggle that we have right now. And I'm curious, you're over in New Brunswick. It seems like that has to be the same problem there as it is over here, but you said that it seems to be working better on that side, and that makes me wonder, because I see the same challenges on both sides of the holistic, and so I'm just curious, is it better in New Brunswick, really?
Yeah, well, potentially. There's definitely positives and negatives, but just to share one example, historically, there are 6 separate Wolastoqey communities in New Brunswick, and there's only one here in the United States. Just when it comes to the reality of the history between the way the United States has dealt with my people as opposed to Canada, there is a significant difference. Yes, and when it comes to the exercise of treaty rights today, there is a significant difference. It's in New Brunswick, Wolastoqey and Mi'kmaq people have the ability to practice traditional life ways throughout the province, and through any what is termed crown land up there, so hunt, fish, and it's not just limited to tribal trust lands. It is the entire province, which is significantly different. and those are treaty rights, as well as the, like I said, the duty to consult is another big one. Any resource development that happens within the province must consult at least with the Osihkiyol and Mi'kmaq, and that opens up opportunities for collaboration, for increased environmental protections, and jobs as well. There's accommodation packages that come through. We say yes, create a mine, but a certain percentage of the workforce should be Osihkiyol and Mi'kmaq people, and that's a massive economic opportunity up there. And I do think some of those are just very real things that we could bring to Maine one day. There are some positives for sure.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt. I mean, even if you put aside all of the unfairness, which I won't, but even if you put aside all the unfairness, just the business benefit for the state of Maine by giving sovereignty is, enough to just do it on that. But apparently some people can't see the real true benefit of sovereignty in the state.
I agree with that. We'd all rise together.
Thank you for putting this on and for Johnson Hall. So I went to Gardner Middle School, and in 7th grade we take Maine history, and I didn't know till this event that what I remember about that history class was learning about Maine's injustices to the Wabanaki people. And so I just want to thank you, Ambassador, for, I didn't know that was because of the work that you did to introduce that legislation, but I want you to know that it really matters, and that history matters, and making sure that that is taught matters. And I'm running for U.S. Senate. Without question, I would love to introduce that piece of legislation on the Senate side. It's embarrassing that our senators have not done that in the past. So thank you. My question, though, Ambassador, you said that it was written in the Land Settlement Claims Act that we will not have to apologize for this in the future. Is that correct?
Well, that'd be Donna.
Donna, sorry.
Indians don't lie.
And then I assume the state.
That's correct. That's
and the
correct.
state has not apologized formally for that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Well, I said the state has not apologized.
No, the state has not apologized.
They should. Thank you.
I really enjoyed this informational session here, and I was wondering if you find it productive, and do you intend or hope to do similar panels in different parts of the state?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's do it. So this is, I want to thank our staff on hand, and this is a good in here to invite you all to join us in this movement if you'd like to. Sage Phillips, who's been doing the microphone, works for the Wabanaki Alliance, and also Monica Castellanos, who is there somewhere, is our associate director, and they can help you sign up to be on our email list if you see them after and would like to stay connected with us. We would love that. And I think, these are 2 members of our board. We have 3 other board members who are very distinguished tribal leaders in their own right. So I think, but between all of us, we can do a whole lot of teaching.
Thank you so much for this incredible evening and all that we've learned. I'm just wondering, I remember the impact of the ruling, I guess it came down from the Attorney General, about the water rights on the Penobscot River, because it was back in maybe 2018 or so, where the islands remained part of the reservation, but the Penobscot lost water rights. Where do things stand with that? Has that changed? Has there been any progress around that issue?
Things have sunk. So the whole thing there is the Penobscot Nation maintains that the Penobscot River is part of our ancestral territory. The land claims says that only the islands are part of our territory. So that comes into play when we want to talk about clean water regulations, how healthy the fish are to eat. We're a sustenance fishing people, but you can barely eat fish out of the river with the levels of pollution still in there. So that case was the federal government and the Penobscot Nation versus the state of Maine, and we lost at every level, appealed it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court declined to hear it. So where it stands right now, the state asserts authority over the Penobscot River, even as we live within it.
Tribe adopted the Penobscot River, right?
Yeah, we made it a citizen to try to have more rights.
It is a citizen.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter what they say.
Yep.
Maulian, while we're recording, I'd love to get your thoughts about three things. Sort of a follow-up to Troy. In your estimation, is the Maine State Legislature the sole forum for amendments to the Implementing Act, Settlement Act? To what extent, to Troy's point, to what extent does a cultural shift need to happen, just having someone who's favorable in office, in the legislature, in order to, if there will be any, in terms of what has yet to be accomplished, if there will be any sort of dismantling or amending of the Implementing Act, of the Settlement Act, will that be solely in the forum of the Maine State Legislature, and will an incremental approach be the only approach? I'd just love to get your thoughts about those three things.
You came to play, Chuck. So if we had a governor right now that was fully in support of the recognition of our tribal sovereignty that we have never ceded, just like the land, we'd have all these amendments done already. The House and the Senate have sent things to the governor that would have made all of these changes that that task force passed, and that has not happened. So I think that's a very important piece of this, is having a chief executive for the state that believes in tribal sovereignty and wants to support it, and having a governing body willing to send that forth to the governor like we've had over the past few years. It's been a real split, having so many lawmakers, like Senator Hickman, Troy Jackson, Tom Arnett, right here, believing in this, and then reaching that final place and having it sent back. And we've been really close on some veto overrides, but there's been a lot of, hallway lobbying, getting folks to flip their votes and not override these vetoes. And that's politics, and we're used to it, and we're in here for the long haul, so we'll get there. But there is a federal piece to this too, and I think I get excited about people in the United States government that would want to help us out, because we want to nurture that relationship. We should have a better relationship with the federal government. We've been so stymied by this state stuff. So I would love to explore, having a better means of connecting with the federal government once we get over some of these key hurdles in the state. There is the Maine Implementing Act, so we do need to act here too, but I would love to see a stronger presence in both places. And I think we can get there. And I think that the progress we've made isn't nothing. And we've really, I can remember a time, even when Donna pulled me into this work as a teenager, where you wouldn't really have rooms like this. There was definitely supporters and people that believed in it, but it wasn't as widespread. It wasn't a popular candidate question to people running for high office. It's really been building slowly, and it impresses me that Mainers are really standing up for this stuff and wanting to learn about it and wanting to help. So I think there's a social component, and I do think a very important component is who's in office and that elections matter.
Oh, we're going to do one more question? Okay. Sage, I'm not sure who the one question is.
Thank you. My name is Ted Kanalakis. I'm an Episcopal priest, have been for 43 years. I serve on the Committee for Indian Relations. We've been talking within that committee for probably 8 or 9 years about changing the name. I have been strong in advocacy for putting the name, the word sovereignty in that committee title. I was told that there would be interviews with and questioning amongst our members of that committee with members of the tribal nations and leaders, elders. I have not heard any responses or any actions that actually have been taken in that regard when it comes to renaming the committee. I would just like to ask you, because there was a meeting at the end of this month right here in Gardner of the committee in person rather than the Zoom meeting. And I would like to come back with an answer to a question, which was that, do you think that's important to keep that word sovereignty in front of people as important enough to be in the name of the title of that committee? And if you could give me your own personal answer as to how you feel about how important that might be, I will be able to bring that information back. I thank you.
Hey there. If I recall correctly, we did have a conversation in one of our board meetings in response to that request, and I remember the unanimous response was yes. It sounds like a wonderful name change. So just speaking for myself now, yes, I think that sounds wonderful, and I'm pretty sure we all were united in that response as well. Right? If I recall correctly.
We have one more question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Whoops. I'm so grateful to all of you. This has been really inspiring and educational, and it makes me want to get out and even do more. You've noted several times that the public has changed, and 70% voting for the reinstituting the language into the Constitution, treaty language, is a really hopeful sign. Are there ways to use the citizen amendment process, whatever it's called, to even put up something like the federal recognition, granting tribes federal recognition? Is there a workaround to not just putting it in the hierarchical setting of a governor? The referendum process, yeah.
Make sovereignty through a referendum instead of legislation.
Even the federal rights piece of it, just.
Yeah, people have approached us before with doing that. I think we have to be careful with referendums. We've been through hell with gaming referendums. So in 2003, there was a question on the ballot for a casino for Penobscot and Passamaquoddy that we were going in on together. My dad was chief then, and my dad, if you know him, he's not about gambling. He's very much the opposite. But he so believed in the sovereignty behind it that he went really hard and put a lot of himself into that. And I got a front row seat to all of that. Bangor had a question on the ballot to put slot machines into their racetrack, and I think they beat us like 2-1. We were soundly defeated, and Bangor cruised on to have a casino. So now you have referendums, the threat of them weaponized against us sometimes. Like, we had some gaming legislation really making it through the Senate, and then a referendum sort of sneakily attached to try to, put a piece of the gaming out to the whole state. So I think we want to be really strategic about referendums. I think it's a great instinct if we had no foreseeable future of a governor who would get behind this stuff. I think it is a tool in the toolbox, and I think if we ever want to do it, we got to do it right and done.
I want to say something. Yeah, so, when you put in a referendum, they can put in an opposite referendum. So when you put one in, you might not get what you bargained for. Just saying.
Well, we're all out of this mic says dead mic on it, and I think that's time to go home. I can take a hint. And,
Thank you.